Hi, this is Abhilash, and today we're going to talk about cartoonizing images with the help of CartoonGAN. So, CartoonGAN is a GAN architecture which has been built in 2018 and has been applied to cartoonize images from original images. So, it has been used in creating illustrious cartoonized versions of particular images. So, GANs, as we all know, is a neural network architecture which is used for adversarial learning. So GANs have been instrumental in creating different art forms through different architectures. Now, cartoons are a special case of images because cartoons have the special feature of borders and standard textures or shading. So cartoons are an artistic form which are prevalent everywhere, particularly in children's books, and are mostly based on real life. So as the fields of adversarial learning progresses, we have seen that GANs have been merged with neural networks to produce different kinds of architectures, which in turn creates different art forms. So we have seen through different papers like style transfer, StyleGAN pix to pix, how style transfer of one visual image to another visual image is done with the help of GANs. Now, these kind of adversarial learning architectures are being exploited to produce different unique versions of images. Now, these are used to create unique, unseen, and diverse art forms from images, even GIFs and videos. In the world of cartoons, particularly in the case of Japanese anime, they have brought a wide range or a plethora of artistic stories for everyone to enjoy. So cartoonizing images is now very much easier with the help of the Hugging Face Gradio app, which I've built, and we'll be looking into that towards the end of this demo. Now, before we go into the original background behind the research of this CartoonGAN architecture, we are going to understand a little bit about styling images and why it is important. Now, stylizing images in an artistic manner has been widely studied in the domain of NPR, or non-photorealistic rendering. CartoonGAN is the paper which has brought an innovative approach to cartoon stylization through GANs. Cartoon GANs creates cartoons, and these requires a huge effort by artists to manually create boundaries of characters as well as apply a consistent shading pattern. Now, although most real world images which have been converted to cartoons for illustration purposes all have this unique property of perfectly bordered elements and segmented elements, which can be easily recognized through their standard shadings as well as the texture patterns. Now, the contemporary softwares for creating believable art, so let's say any neural network convolution based, which have been used for creating art forms from real images without the semantic transformation, have the certain limitations. And GANs exploit two different neural network architectures, that is the generator and the discriminator, training one of them to create as brilliant art images possible from the real world images. And the discriminator has to decide whether the generated image from the generator is a cartoon image or a real world image. Adversarial networks which stylize real world images into cartoons have emerged very much beneficial in the saving an artist's time as well as their efforts to produce illustrative anime. Even through traditional GANs, let's say cyclical networks, CycleGAN, for example, has achieved good results for style transfer. Producing cartoon images is hurdle mainly due to the two major reasons. The first reason is instead of applying textures such as brush strokes, in many styles, cartoon images are highly abstracted and simplified from real world photos. Although different artists have different styles, most of the cartoonized illustrations almost have a similar pattern. And the pattern is that they have cleared edges, smooth color shading, and simple textures, which is different from any other forms of artwork. This led to the development of building a stylized GAN architecture that can effectively map the real world images to their cartoon manifolds without using a paired set of training images. Now, this particular part is very important because if we are not using paired set of training images without the labeling part, we are making the GAN architecture robust to adversarial noise. Having unpaired or non-correspondent image manifolds for mapping leads to a more robust stylized network, which can associate and map contents to the cartoon world seamlessly. To increase the efficiency of stylization, we create an alternative loss functions such as L1 sparse regularization in the high-level feature map of the VGG architecture. So the inherent base architecture on which this model is going to be built upon is the VGG. So moving ahead with the image synthesis with GANs. Now GANs have been instrumental in creating state-of-the-art image synthesis models and art forms, let's say for super resolution, as well as image-to-image translation. The idea behind a GAN architecture is to train two neural networks, just as I have mentioned, the generator and the discriminator. But the difference lies in the adversarial loss. So the adversarial loss provided by the discriminator always pushes the generated images that is produced by the generator towards the target manifold. So if we were to interpret this in the CartoonGAN section, so this will have the discriminator pushing the generated images, that is the cartoonized images, towards the target manifold, that means towards the real world images. So GANs have been used to add a video component from static images as well, which have been taken from the paper Few-Shot Adversarial Learning of realistic neural talking head models. So this is one of the peculiar application of GANs, where we can see that we have a talking head of Mona Lisa. So coming to the architecture and the mathematical model of standard GAN, the discriminator always tries to maximize the probability of assigning correct labels, as it should be, because it has to decide whether the particular generated image is the real world image or is it just a cartoon illustration of that. The generator is trained to do just the opposite. So it is trained to minimize the probability of getting caught by the discriminator. Now, if you were to see this, this will just appear as a minimax kind of a game. So the standard GAN can always be analyzed as a zero-sum game or a minimax game, where the discriminator always tries to maximize its probability of being correct by assigning correct labels at the expense of the generator's output. And this is given by the equations over here. So we see a minimax equation of V of D of G, but effectively that is the loss. We see V of D of G as expectation of the data, that is X belongs to the P data, log of D of X, where D stands for the discriminator, summation of expectation of Z, which belongs to the distribution of the generator, log of 1 minus D of G of Z. So where G stands for the generator. Now, a particular GAN architecture looks very much like the figure given here. So we have a generator, we input random images in latent form, and we take the sample which is generated from the generator, that is the fake sampled images, and we put it into the discriminator, and we match it with the real sample. And we test whether the discriminator is able to distinguish between the real and the fake images or not. Now, as we might have guessed, the discriminator should have a binary logistic because it has to identify whether the generated image is being sent to the correct label or not. In the case of the generator, it is quite erratic because it has to produce many different samples or many fake samples to fool the discriminator. Pixel-to-pixel image translation GANs require training samples with paired or corresponding images. This is also an important thing as well as a drawback, because if we were to have a pixel-to-pixel image translation GAN, pix to name, in that case, we need to have paired images because it not only matches the localized semantics, but also the global semantics of a particular image. Now, this is very difficult to obtain in the case of cartoonization because we do not have as many samples of illustrations from the real world images in the case of CartoonGAN. So alternatively, we have the cyclic GAN model or the cycle GAN model, which does not require training on image pairs. Rather, we just provide a sample set of, let's say, a manifold domain, and we provide the real world domain images, and we use the two GANs for simultaneous training without providing correct labels to them. So this allows robustness because we are explicitly not labeling which picture belongs to which one. So this training produces a mapping from different manifolds, that is A to B. Let's say A stands for our real world images and B our cartoon images, and vice versa. The resulting loss that we have is attained by combining the adversarial losses of the two GANs. As the depth of the model increases, so does the time taken for the cycle GAN to converge. And this is one of the major drawbacks of the cycle GAN architecture. it converges very slowly. CycleGAN also uses an alternative loss for making the training process very efficient without requiring additional image pair samples. Now, if we move to the current architecture, that is the CartoonGAN architecture, which has been taken from the 2018 paper. So the architecture looks just like the figure shown here. This is the generator architecture. So as we know, the generator network is used for mapping the real-world images to the cartoon manifold. The generator G starts with a flat convolution stage followed by two down convolution blocks. Now this is very important because it has to downsample those images to spatially encode and compress the images. This allows extraction of local signals in the downstream transformation. 8 residual blocks are then applied to construct the content and the manifold feature. Now, as we know, residual blocks means sending a part of the input and appending it after a transformation. That is an identity transformation that happens if we pass this X code, X feature map from the input towards the end and adding it to f of X. Now, this particular mapping or residual mapping is effectively an identity mapping. The output cartoonized images are produced by two up convolution blocks, which contain a fractionally strided convolution layer with a stride of half, and a final convolution layer with 7x7 kernels. The most important part in the generator architecture is the downsampling, passing through the residual blocks, and then spatially passing them and decoding them by upsampling, which is there in the last part. So what this does is it allows us to encode the localized spatial features in the image that is used for cartoonizing them better. Now we'll be looking into the other details which allows us to make the boundaries of a particular image during cartoonization very much easier. So before that, let's get into the discriminator network. So the discriminator network is required for separating the real world images from the cartoonized ones. In this case, to increase the speed of convergence, the network D uses a patch level discriminator. So for cartoon style discrimination, the network relies on the local feature maps and hence is designed to be shallow. Because if we were to increase the depth of the neural network in the case of discriminator, we will not be able to abstract the boundaries of particular images. So after the flat convolution layers, the network has two strided convolution blocks to reduce the resolution and encode the essential semantic features for classification. A feature construction block is followed by a 3x3 convolution layer is used to obtain the classification response. Leaky ReLU is used after each normalization layer with the alpha as 0.2. The figures that we see are all illustrations of the cycle of the CartoonGAN architecture, which has been built by taking some features from Pix2Pix as well as StyleGAN and robust training of adversarial networks. Now, if we move into the loss functions, this is where it gets interesting. The loss function of the CartoonGAN has two unique components. The first one is the adversarial loss. The second one is the content loss. So what does this mean? So the adversarial loss allows the generator network to achieve the desired manifold transformation. So it is applied to both the generator and the discriminator and controls the effect of the generated images. Okay, so this is because training the generator or the discriminator to delineate between the real world and the illustrated or the generated cartoon images is not sufficient because of the clear edges that is present in a very small amount in the case of real world images. Hence, an output image without clearly reproducible edges but correct shading will likely confuse the discriminator with a standard loss. To prevent this problem, the authors of the paper decided to generate a set of images from the trained cartoon images by separating the edges. So what they did is they took a particular real world image and they detected the edge pixels with the help of Canny filter. Now they dilated the edges and then applied a Gaussian blur for smoothing them. This edge promoting adversarial loss is aimed at training the discriminator to maximize the probability of assigning the correct labels to the generated images as well as the real world ones. And also this will in turn help the generator to produce more beautiful illustrious cartoonized images. So mathematically, this is given by the equation where we take the expectation of the CI that belongs to the S data, the set of data that belongs to the cartoon manifold. We take the logarithmic of D of CI plus the expectations of the S data, which belongs to the manifold, that is log of 1 minus D of E of J, plus the expectations of data, which belongs to the manifold, log of 1 minus D of G of P of K. Now, CI belongs part of the cartoon manifold, EJ belongs part of the cartoon-like manifold, and C and G of P of K belongs to the manifold, which has the generated images from the generator G. So we are trying to map cartoon images from cartoon-like images. So in this case, the cartoon images we are taking and we are applying a canny filter on the edges so that we can increase the boundary of the edges. Now we dilate those edges and we apply Gaussian blur smoothing on top of them. So this will allow us to create a discriminator model which can generate or which can try to identify the cartoon-like manifold very much easily. So the content loss. So the content loss is the next part which is required to make the stylized images contain the semantic content of the input image. In CartoonGAN, the authors adopted a very high-level feature map from the VGG network, which has been demonstrated to have a good object preservation ability. So that means that it can preserve semantic components in a particular image very appropriately. To capture the appropriate feature maps without being affected by any kind of adversarial style differences in the VGG network, the authors have used an L1 sparse regularization technique. And the content loss is shown in the equation that we see. L of content loss G of D is the expectation of the data which belongs to the generator, VGG of G of P minus VGG L of P of I, where VGG of G of P denotes the generated feature map of the VGG network. These two losses are what makes the CartoonGAN very much peculiar, because the first adversarial loss has been produced to make the discriminator produce cartoon-like manifold images very much clearly, because the authors have already pre-trained the discriminator by producing a canny filtered image and applying a Gaussian blur on them so that the edges becomes clearly visible in the generated cartoon-like images. This will in turn allow the generator to produce images which are very much towards the illustrious cartoonized images. And the content loss is used for providing a correct proper semantic binding on the images which are being cartoonized with the help of the GAN. Because whenever we are cartoonizing a particular image, we need to preserve the semantic contents of a particular image that we are cartoonizing. That is done with the help of content loss. That means appropriate parts of the image should remain preserved in this kind of GAN transformation. Now, initializations. Since GANs take a considerable time to converge to a global minima, random initializations may cause your model or may cause the model to become inefficient, and it may be stuck in local optimum. So the authors chose to pre-train the generator network G with only the semantic content loss to attain better reconstruction. This initialization has helped, or this pre-training rather, has helped CartoonGAN to converge faster with a good convergence. So in the training and evaluation stage stated in the paper, we have seen that this is the input photo, and they have compared the performance of CartoonGAN based upon different Japanese anime styles. So that is the Makoto Shinkai style. So we have the Hayao Miyazaki spirited style. And we see the transformations of these different architectures and its comparison with CartoonGAN. So we see that CycleGAN and L identity also has a somewhat resemblance with the CartoonGAN that we see, but it is not as that much efficient and that much fast during training. And CartoonGAN has been found to be better in the training phase as well as in producing the generated images. This is shown in the configuration over here. So the authors used 256 cross 256 dimensional training images. Both are real world and cartoonized images were used in the training process. A total of So both the real world and cartoonized images were used in the training process. A total of 6,153 real world images were downloaded from Flickr for training and evaluation. For the cartoon images, a total of 14,000 images from popular anime artists Shinkai, Hosoda, and Miyazaki, and Satoshi Kon were used for model training. Compared to the traditional cycle GAN or the neural style transfer techniques, CartoonGAN produced more believable visuals, along with retaining the correct semantic content in the illustrated or the generated images. CartoonGAN's processing time during training is 17.6369 seconds, which is 33% faster than CycleGAN and 50% faster than CycleGAN plus elident. So this is another generated image using CartoonGAN architecture. So now that we have seen and learned about the research behind CartoonGAN, we can see this in action. So this has been built with the Hugging Face Gradio app. So you can find the app over here, CartoonGAN. So if you were to test out any images, so you can use the example images as well as you can upload any kind of image, JPG, PNG format, and we can see the generated output with the help of CartoonGAN. So this application is built on top of Gradio and uses a TensorFlow backend module because the model was initially trained on TensorFlow. So the weights which are present are going to be present in the files and versions. So the raw weights are present in PB format, that is in the saved graph format, frozen graph format. So since this is a TensorFlow model, and this can be used with the help of any TensorFlow applications as well. So, and we can load different pictures to see their cartoonized image versions as well. So this is a light Shinkai model which has been used or trained in this case, and it produces fairly good believable visuals or cartoonized visuals. And the intern architecture which is behind this module is the same architecture of CartoonGAN, that is having this adversarial loss as well as the content loss. Now, we have seen the different parts of this beautiful architecture. And one important takeaway is that CartoonGANs is an innovative field of work. And as we know that GANs are now being used explicitly as the main form of adversarial training everywhere. And there have been so many advancements post CartoonGAN, such as Anime GAN, and also about few shot learning or realization. So any kind of stylized art form which has been used or generated by a GAN relies on this particular idea that there should be an adversarial loss. There should be a model or a loss which tries to preserve the semantic content while we are translating or while we are transforming using the GAN. And CartoonGAN uses a specific feature of those architectures. The most important thing is it does not use paired training samples, let's say trained images or labels paired. Rather, it uses haphazard training samples without any labeling so that it becomes robust to producing a particular or generating a particular manifold. It is very important to identify the real manifold as with respect to the generated manifold. And the discriminator loss should be very much suited to make the generator produce as much of the generated manifold as possible. So this would allow the generator to produce more believable visuals, as we saw in this case. Such as in cartoons, we always have these kinds of borders around images, which needs to be delineated, which needs to have a proper accentuation. So in that case, if we were to blur them, or if those boundaries are present in less amount, it would be a real world image as opposed to a cartoonized image. So that is why a canny filtered based Gaussian blurring was used for pre-training the discriminator. And then in order to preserve the semantic quality of that particular image or semantic information of particular image, we try to apply a VGG architecture at the back. So CartoonGAN has eventually led to more stylized and anime generating GAN architectures. In this blog, we have just seen an overview and the research that went into building CartoonGAN and how it has been used and they have taken the inspiration from CycleGAN, StyleGAN, and different NST architectures. Illustrative images from the real world input images can be found in the Hugging Face Gradio app. The official PyTorch implementation of CartoonGAN is also present in the repository over here. So this is the official PyTorch implementation. So that's it for this video. So I hope you like this video on CartoonGAN and how we can build and create cool apps using Hugging Face and Gradio. So we'll be looking into more such architectures related to NLP and GANs and computer visions in the next few video sections. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up, and also do comment on the different architectures that you may know of, how GANs are have now been used to create different art forms, particularly with the help of multimodal learning. So I hope to see you guys in the next video section.